Managerial Accounting, Example 6A. Please read and be familiar with this example. I apologize for the length of it, but I think it's important to see some of the details so we can see why something that seems sort of obvious actually is something that we ought to cover in class. And what we see here is a situation where somebody who doesn't really understand accounting but expects accountability doesn't understand how the numbers that are provided are not simply the numbers. There are plenty of times when people assume that accounting tells them what they think it tells them, but often accounting doesn't tell you what you think it tells you at all. So that's kind of the example here. So please keep the background and the history of the setting in mind as we go through this example. So what we're asked to do is really to undo what's shown right here in your example. The example says that any costs not directly traceable to a division or region are allocated to divisions and regions on the basis of revenue dollars. So really, if there's any cost anywhere in the company, what the accounting system does is it allocates and attaches that cost to, in this case, the regions, which are the lowest level of organization. And then if you combine the regions, the costs allocated to regions get aggregated in the division, which is the middle level of organization, and all that then gets aggregated up to the company as a whole. So if we look at what's going on in the company, all the company's fixed costs are reported here as the $1,893,000 of fixed costs, and we can see that all those fixed costs are allocated to East and West. And then within West, the $263,000 of fixed costs we can see is allocated to the two different regions within there. That's fine. It makes your income statement clean. It makes sure that every cost is attached to a particular dollar of revenue, so we can see how much revenue we have to cover the cost. The problem is that these divisions have no control over some of these costs, and these regions have no control over some of the costs in their division. So trying to evaluate the profitability of regions or divisions that have no control over their costs doesn't really make any sense. So what we need to do is we need to be careful how we apportion or how we allocate, or whether we even allocate at all, those fixed costs. So I'm going to create a segmented income statement. And what we're going to do is we're going to see that fixed costs happen at different levels. And since fixed costs happen at different levels, our income statements ought to reflect that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have the sales minus variable costs and contribution margin, and we generally assume that sales and variable cost are directly traceable to regions or divisions. They're directly traceable to wherever the revenues go. But it's the fixed costs that tend to be more allocated. They tend to be costs that happen at higher levels and get allocated downward in the organization. So what we really want to do is let our fixed costs sort of roll up from the lowest level of organization, which we have here as region. So we're going to have our fixed costs at the region level, and then we're going to, if we subtract our regional fixed cost from our contribution margin, we get a margin that I'll call the region margin, which is a little bit specific to this example, but I think you can see the idea that at whatever level those fixed costs are, we should strike a subtotal there and make that be a margin that we can use to evaluate. And then we can include the division fixed costs. We can go up one level, and we can see all the fixed costs that are directly traceable to a division, and then that gives us the divisional margin. And then after that, we can have the company level fixed costs, and we would have the company margin or the NOI at the company level. So that's what we're going to do. Now we're asked specifically in this example to split the West division by regions and split the whole company into the two East and West divisions. So what I'll do is I'll show the East division first here, and then I'll show the West division in its two regions, Northwest and Southwest. And the total for the West division, so I'll center this over those three. And then we'll have the company as a whole. So that's how we need to focus on things. So we'll drop in the numbers that we have for sales. For East Division, our sales are given here. Go ahead and format everything. So East Division sales are $3,350,000. Our variable cost are $1,520,000, and so our contribution margin is the difference between these two. And now what kind of fixed costs do we have? Well, regional fixed costs. If we look at our data, we can see that a total of $1,335,000 of fixed costs are traceable to the East Division, and so the East Division as a region, the East, put these in the wrong spot. The East Division has a margin of $495,000. Now, we're not splitting the East Division into its two regions, so we don't need that detail. But if we're going to look at the East Division as a whole, we can see that given the costs that are actually traceable to that division, it makes a profit of $495,000, which is a lot better than the profit of $200,000 that we see here, because those costs, the additional costs that are allocated to it, the difference between the $1,629,000 and the $1,335,000, those allocated costs are costs that happen at the company level, not the division level. Now let's take a look at the West Division. Take its two regions, $195,000 of sales and $78,000 of variable costs for Northwest, and for Southwest, $98,000 and $43,000. So we can see the contribution margin of these two divisions. And now the fixed cost, if we look at our data, we can see that fixed cost, $106,000 is Northwest, $77,000 is Southwest. And we can do regional margins. And we can see that even without including the divisional fixed cost, okay, the Southwest region is losing money on its own. All right, that's a problem. Just because we stop allocating fixed costs doesn't mean everything's inherently profitable. But here's where some of the other facts about it being new expansion and that kind of thing, those kind of facts are relevant here. So do we really want to close down a region that's newly expanding? It might be profitable. If we include a total of Northwest and Southwest into a company-wide, or a division-wide income statement, we can see that the division is losing $11,000, and then when we put in the $55,000 that were given as its fixed costs right here, we can see that the West Division is losing, whoops, that's not right. We can see that the West Division is losing money. It's losing $66,000. It's not losing $91,000. All right, again, the difference in the total fixed cost, we've got a regional fixed cost of $183 and divisional fixed cost of $55. So we've got a total of $238 of fixed costs, not $263. So the West Division, evaluated on its own, still needs work. Again, just because we stop allocating fixed costs that shouldn't be there doesn't mean it's inherently profitable. But what it does allow us to do is to see the West region on its own. How much work does it need to do? How much more profit does it need to generate? Company-wide, we can take our two divisions, the East Division and the West Division. We can combine those. And we can add all of those, we can combine all these. So we've got total variable cost, total contribution margin. And we can see that together our two regions are making our two divisions are making $429,000 of divisional margin. Company-wide fixed costs, if we look at our data, we can see that $320,000 of fixed costs are being incurred at the national headquarters, not directly traceable to either division. And so we can see that our total net profit of $109,000 matches the company-wide net profit of $109,000. But if we look at it with this level of detail, especially with our fixed costs, we can see that a lot of the fixed costs really are being incurred at the company level, so the controller here had a point. And we can see that some of the costs that are being allocated to particular regions and divisions aren't necessarily under their control. So our fixed cost of $1,629,000 and $263 are probably not reasonable ways to evaluate the performance of these divisions or the regions within them. So Brody Crowder needs to learn a little bit more about accounting and probably needs a little bit more humility too. So that's managerial accounting example 6A.